When Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban announced their separation, the world reacted with shock, confusion, and endless questions. For nearly 2 decades, they have been seen as one of Hollywood's most beautiful couples, a soft-spoken Australian actress with unmatched grace, and a country music superstar whose voice and charm had taken over the world. Their love story was considered magical, the kind of romance that looked flawless from the outside. Red carpet photos showed them holding hands, gazing into each other's eyes and smiling as if nothing could ever go wrong. Interviews portrayed them as deeply connected, and fans believed their bond was strong enough to survive anything. But behind the cameras, behind the carefully chosen words and glowing smiles, another story was slowly forming. One filled with pain, loneliness, emotional distance, and truths that Nicole kept hidden for years. Now, after their divorce, Nicole has decided to speak openly for the first time, revealing what really happened inside their marriage. And the truth is far more complicated and heartbreaking than anyone expected. She explains that their relationship was not the fairy tale people imagined. It had beautiful moments, yes, but it also had cracks that kept growing, cracks that she tried to hide even from herself. She describes nights of waiting alone while Keith traveled endlessly, moments when she felt invisible even while standing beside him, and periods when she carried the emotional weight of the marriage almost entirely on her own. Nicole admits that she kept quiet for a long time because she wanted to protect Keith, protect her family, and protect the delicate image the world had created around them. She didn't want judgment, she didn't want pity, and she didn't want their private struggles turned into gossip headlines. But now, after finally stepping out of the shadows of her silence, she is ready to reveal the side of the story that no one ever saw. The exhaustion, the emotional scars, the constant fear of losing herself, and the truth about who Keith Urban really was behind closed doors. Her voice does not come from anger or revenge, but from clarity. She says she stayed silent to keep the peace, but silence turned into suffering. She tried to be the strong partner, the patient wife, the one who believed love could fix everything. Yet life, she explains, does not follow the scripts of romantic movies. Love is not always enough when one person is breaking inside and the other is drifting away. When she speaks now, her words are calm but heavy, filled with years of unspoken truths. Nicole explains how Keith's demanding music career constantly pulled him away, how fame changed the rhythm of their home, and how emotional distance created a wall she could no longer climb over. She shares how she tried to support him through his struggles, his stress, and his self-doubt, but over time she realized that caring for him meant losing herself. In the end, her breaking point was not anger or betrayal. It was a quiet realization that she deserved peace, understanding, and a life where she didn't have to fight for love every day. And so, for the first time, Nicole Kidman is revealing what she once hid. The real story of a marriage that looked perfect in public, but slowly fell apart in private as Nicole continues to speak. She explains that the early years of her marriage with Keith Urban were filled with hope and genuine love. But even within those warm memories, she now sees signs she overlooked, signs of emotional imbalance, signs of exhaustion, and signs of a partner who was already drifting before she even realized it. She remembers the beginning vividly. The excitement of building a life together, of believing that love alone would be strong enough to handle the pressures of fame, constant travel, and the expectations of millions of fans. Nicole says she tried to convince herself that the challenges they faced were temporary, that Keith's long absences, sudden mood changes, and emotional shutdowns were simply part of his demanding career, not warnings of deeper issues. She admits that she carried belief that if she just loved him harder, supported him more, stayed patient, and sacrificed her own needs, everything would eventually fall into place. But slowly, quietly, the weight became heavier. She describes waking up in an empty bed, staring at the quiet ceiling, wondering when her husband would return, not physically, but emotionally. Keith could be warm, funny, and loving one day, offering her tenderness that made her believe everything was fine, and the next day he could shut down completely, disappearing into himself, his work, or his thoughts, leaving Nicole feeling like a stranger in her own marriage. These emotional swings created a constant uncertainty, and Nicole admits she walked to their home with careful steps, unsure which version of her husband she would face each morning. She says the public never saw these moments. They saw the glamorous red carpet smiles, the hugs, the affectionate gestures, but they never saw the quiet evenings where she sat alone by the window, waiting for him to come home from the studio, or the long nights when he returned physically present but emotionally far away. Nicole explains that she tried to communicate her feelings many times, telling Keith that she missed him, that she needed him, that she felt alone even when he was in the same room. But often, instead of connection, she was met with silence, dismissiveness, or promises that things would get better after the next tour, after the next album, after the next project. Years passed in this cycle, and Nicole began to feel like she was living with a ghost of the man she once knew. She says she lost count of how many times she sat at the dinner table alone, pushing food around her plate, while waiting for a conversation that never came. She remembers tears slipping down her face quietly, not because she was angry, but because she felt unseen, like her emotions, her needs, and even her presence no longer mattered in the marriage. Nicole explains that Keith's career was exploding during these years, and she wanted to be proud and supportive. She attended his concerts, held his hand at award shows, and cheered him on from the front row. But she says that behind every applause, she was hurting. Each time the crowd celebrated him, she felt him slipping further away. Fame didn't just change his schedule. It changed his priorities, his energy, and his emotional availability. Nicole says she began to feel like she was competing with the entire world for her husband's attention, and she knew that was a battle she could never win. She loved him deeply, but she was slowly losing herself in the process. The loneliness became a quiet ache that lived inside her, growing stronger each year, and even though she never spoke about it publicly at the time, it became the foundation of the truth she is now finally ready to reveal. Nicole says one of the hardest parts of her marriage was realizing how often she had to pretend to be fine, pretend to be strong, pretend that nothing was wrong even when she felt herself breaking inside. She describes how the world viewed her as a confident, graceful, powerful woman. Yet behind closed doors, she often felt fragile and unseen. She carried the weight of protecting Keith's public image, while quietly dealing with the emotional distance that grew wider with every passing year. Nicole explains that whenever the media praised them as the perfect couple, she forced herself to smile, even though each compliment felt like a reminder of everything she was missing at home. She says she didn't want to embarrass Keith, didn't want to begin rumors, and didn't want people viewing her marriage as weak or broken. So she kept the truth tucked away, convincing herself that she just had to hold on a little longer, that things would eventually return to the loving, hopeful beginning they once shared. But as the years passed, Nicole began to recognize a painful truth. She was living in a relationship where she gave endlessly and received very little emotional support in return. She describes moments where she reached out for comfort, guidance, or even a simple conversation, only to find Keith distant or preoccupied. If she tried to talk about her feelings, he would nod, offer quick apologies, or blame stress. But there were rarely meaningful changes. Nicole says she started to feel like a lighthouse calling out into a dark ocean, hoping for a response that never came. That sense of emotional invisibility became one of the deepest wounds she carried. She mentions that some nights, she would sit at the edge of the bed, holding a pillow close, wondering if love was supposed to feel this lonely. She questioned her worth, her expectations, and whether she was asking for too much by simply wanting her husband to be emotionally present. Nicole explains that emotional neglect is something many people never talk about because it leaves no obvious scars. There are no visible marks, no dramatic arguments, no explosive scenes, just a slow fading of connection that makes a person feel smaller and smaller over time. She says she spent years trying to fill the silence with positivity, telling herself that his career demands were temporary, that his moods were normal, that she just needed to be patient. But patience, she learned, can become a trap when it means constantly sacrificing your own emotional well-being. She recalls how she would prepare dinner, light candles, and try to create warm moments for them, only to watch Keith rush through the meal, scrolling through his phone or thinking about work. She says she tried to adapt, tried to understand, tried to compromise, but the emotional gap never closed. Nicole describes a particular memory that still stings. She had returned home from a long film shoot, excited to finally spend time with Keith after weeks apart. She had planned a quiet night for them, imagining laughter, conversation, and reconnection. But when she walked through the door, Keith barely looked up from his guitar. He greeted her with a brief smile, said he was working on a song, and disappeared into his studio. Nicole stood there in silence, suitcase still in hand, realizing that the person she was so eager to see did not feel the same urgency to reconnect with her. That moment, she says, was when she first began to understand the depth of the loneliness living inside her. She had returned home, but home no longer felt like a place where she was emotionally welcomed, as she reflects now. Nicole says that one of her biggest regrets was not speaking up sooner. Not for Keith's sake, but for her own. She admits she stayed quiet because she feared conflict, feared judgment, and feared losing the man she loved. But silence, she learned, only deepened the cracks. By the time she finally gathered the strength to confront the reality of their marriage, she realized that her emotional needs had been ignored for so long that she didn't even recognize herself anymore. She spent years standing beside a man she loved, while slowly fading into the background of her own life. And now, after finally walking away, she is ready to tell the truth about the emotional emptiness she carried, and the strength it took to finally choose herself. Nicole reveals that the decline of her marriage was not sudden. It was slow, subtle, and deeply painful. She describes how small disagreements, once harmless, gradually turned into silent battles neither of them knew how to resolve. She recalls moments when she would look across the room at Keith and feel as if she were staring at a stranger, someone familiar in face, voice, and presence, yet distant in spirit. She explains that this emotional drifting crept into their relationship without any dramatic incident. There were no explosive fights, no storms of anger, no shouts echoing through the house. Instead, it was the quiet moments that hurt her the most. The times when Keith would sit next to her without really being there. The times when he seemed absent even while sharing the same space. These were the invisible wounds, the ones that nobody saw but she felt every day. Nicole shares that one of the hardest truths to accept was that love alone could not fix the cracks in their marriage. She admits that for a long time, she believed the strength of their bond, their shared memories, and the life they built would naturally guide them back to each other. But she learned that love cannot survive without communication, trust, and consistent effort from both people. She says she often tried to start conversations about their relationship, gently asking Keith if he was happy, if he felt fulfilled, if there was something weighing on him. But instead of opening up, he would shut down or brush off the questions with short, vague answers. She felt as if she were constantly knocking on a door that remained closed. And every time, the rejection chipped away at her hope. Nicole remembers the nights when she lay awake, thinking about the promises they once made. She thought about the early days of passion, the laughter, the affectionate gestures, and the certainty that they were meant to stay together forever. She wondered how they reached a point where they were physically near, but emotionally miles apart. She questioned whether she failed him, whether she pushed too hard for stability, whether she expected too much. But then she realized that a marriage can only survive when both people hold the same vision for the future. Over time, Keith's dreams shifted toward freedom, spontaneity, and the open road, while Nicole longed for security, family, and emotional grounding. They were two people still in love, but moving in opposite directions. The emotional separation became even more painful when public appearances demanded that they pretend everything was perfect. Nicole explains how walking red carpets became exhausting performances. They held hands, smiled for cameras, and posed as a united couple, but inside she felt like she was breaking. She says that sometimes the flash of cameras made her heart ache, because it highlighted the difference between their public image and the reality she lived at home. She felt trapped in a story that no longer reflected her truth. She often questioned why she had to play a role even in her own marriage, why she had to hide her pain and fears just to maintain an illusion that no longer felt worth protecting. Nicole also reveals that during these difficult years, she noticed changes in Keith's behavior that left her feeling unsettled. His secrecy grew. He spent more time on his phone, more nights away, more hours in the studio with the door locked. She felt as if she were constantly on the outside of his life, looking in through a window that kept fogging up. She sensed emotional and possibly relational shifts she could not fully understand. She admits she tried to ignore the signs because she feared what she might discover if she looked too closely. But the fear of confronting the truth did not stop the pain from growing. The cracks in their marriage, once small and barely noticeable, had now turned into deep lines that divided them. By the time they reached the early 2020s, Nicole realized that she was living inside the shell of a marriage that no longer nurtured either of them. She says the silence between them became heavier than words, and the distance became too wide to bridge. She held on for as long as she could. For their children, for their history, for the promise of what they once were. But even her boundless patience could not stop their marriage from slowly unraveling. In the end, Nicole understood that letting go was not a sign of failure. It was a first step toward healing. She needed to find herself again, to rediscover the parts of her soul she had lost while trying to hold everything together. And choosing to walk away was the bravest thing she had done in years, as Nicole slowly allowed herself to open up about the years leading to her divorce. She explained how the emotional burden began affecting every part of her life. What people saw on camera was a graceful woman with perfect posture, a steady smile, and calm confidence. But behind closed doors, she felt exhausted from carrying a home that no longer supported her. She recalls how she spent countless nights in quiet contemplation, wondering how two people who once felt inseparable had become so disconnected. She tried to reassure herself that every marriage goes through hard phases, that long-term relationships have seasons of distance and repair. But this time, the distance seemed permanent, like a silent wall between them that kept growing taller no matter how hard she tried to climb over it. Nicole expressed that her dedication to stability and emotional safety sometimes made Keith feel overwhelmed. She was raised in an environment where structure, discipline, and responsibility were core values. Her mother's illness when she was young forced her to mature early and understand the importance of being dependable. She carried that mindset into adulthood, believing that love meant protecting the people you care about, even if it meant sacrificing pieces of yourself. Because of this, she often felt responsible for maintaining harmony in the marriage, making sure their daughters were emotionally safe, and ensuring their home was calm and stable. But over time, she realized that she had taken on too much. Trying to save the marriage alone had drained her emotionally, leaving her depleted and resentful. She recalls moments when she would watch Keith get ready for another tour, packing bags, tuning guitars, preparing playlists, and humming melodies. Those moments used to fill her with pride and admiration. She loved his passion and talent. But as the years passed, those same moments began to sting. Every tour meant more distance, more nights alone, more unanswered questions in her heart. She often wondered if she was asking too much by wanting to be home more, or if he was asking too much by wanting limitless freedom. Their needs simply no longer aligned, and the imbalance grew with each passing year. She felt like she was anchored to the ground while he was chasing the horizon. She needed stability. He needed movement. She needed calm. He needed stimulation. These opposing needs slowly eroded their bond. Nicole also talked about the strange duality of fame, a force that brought them together but also contributed to pulling them apart. Being in the spotlight meant their successes, failures, arguments, reconciliations, and even silences could become headlines overnight. She said the pressure of constantly being watched, judged, and analyzed made it harder for them to heal quietly. Rumors, speculations, and paparazzi interpretations added weight to their existing problems. Every time she read a headline about their marriage, she felt as if strangers were telling her story for her. She felt robbed of privacy, especially when she was already emotionally vulnerable. And Keith, who often used music as an escape, seemed to withdraw deeper into his world whenever the spotlight intensified. Nicole admitted that one of the most difficult parts was pretending in public even when everything inside her felt broken. The expectation to smile, to pose, to look radiant, to appear united, it all felt like an act she could no longer perform. She described the emotional toll of returning home after glamorous events, removing makeup, and sitting in silence, feeling like she was peeling off a mask she no longer recognized. Over time, the difference between Nicole Kidman, the public figure, and Nicole the woman became painfully wide. She desperately wanted to reconnect with her true self, to rediscover who she was beyond the titles of wife, actress, mother, and celebrity. Another deep wound she revealed was emotional confusion she felt from Keith's mixed behaviors, moments when he seemed loving, affectionate, and gentle, followed by sudden emotional distance. These inconsistencies made her question her own judgment. She started doubting whether she was expecting too much or misinterpreting his actions. She tried to understand him through empathy, but she realized that she could not make sense of someone who did not fully understand himself. The emotional roller coaster left her exhausted, feeling like she was constantly adjusting compromising, and bending until she felt stretched too thin to recognize herself, be why the time they reached the breaking point in 2025, Nicole understood that she had given everything she could to keep the marriage alive. She had sacrificed her emotional comfort, her sense of peace, and even parts of her identity. Filing for divorce was not a moment of anger. It was a moment of profound clarity. She recognized that staying would only continue to hurt her and their daughters. Leaving, though heartbreaking, was an act of self-preservation. It was the moment she finally chose her own well-being after years of prioritizing everyone else's needs above her own. As more time passed after Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's divorce, people began to notice a clear change in the way Nicole talked about fame, relationships, and personal balance. Even though she did not directly attack Keith, every once in a while she would share a small detail or a thoughtful message that made people think she was speaking from personal experience. Nicole had always been known as a calm and composed person, but now she seemed more direct, more confident, and more open about what she believed in. She said in one interview their relationship only works when both people walk at the same pace and carry the same weight in life. Many people took this as a hint that during her marriage, she had sometimes felt alone in the emotional work. She talked about moments where a person gives too much, hoping the other person will catch up, but the gap keeps growing. Nicole said this kind of silent struggle can break even the strongest relationship if it continues for too long. Her tone was not angry. It was more reflective, like someone who had learned a powerful lesson after years of trying. Nicole also spoke openly about how important stability and calmness are for her. She said she works best in a peaceful environment, with people who communicate clearly and respectfully. Some fans connected this with rumors about Keith's lifestyle, particularly the idea that he sometimes slipped into old habits or became overwhelmed under pressure. Nicole never confirmed this, but her emphasis on consistency and emotional safety made people wonder what challenges she might have faced at home. It is possible she had grown tired of managing unpredictable situations or repeating the same emotional conversations. She once said that love should not feel like a rescue mission, and many saw this as a strong message about her expectations in a partner. She suggested that when one person repeatedly tries to fix things or bring stability to someone else's life, the relationship slowly becomes unbalanced. Instead of sharing a journey, it starts to feel like carrying someone. Another interesting thing Nicole discussed was how fame can create invisible pressure inside a marriage. She said when two people are public figures, their success can sometimes become a silent competition without either person realizing it. She mentioned that when one partner shines, the other may feel overshadowed, even if they don't say it out loud. Nicole hinted that jealousy, insecurity, or emotional distance can quietly grow in such situations. These comments made some people suspect that their careers might have influenced the marriage more deeply than fans ever knew. Nicole also talked about how a couple must protect their private moments, but she said it becomes difficult when the world is constantly watching, judging, and creating their own stories. She admitted that after her divorce, she finally felt her mind become quiet again, something she hadn't experienced in years. She also explained how important trust and reliability are to her, not just in marriage, but in life in general. She said when trust breaks, even a little, it changes everything. It doesn't matter if it breaks because of actions, words, or unspoken behavior. Once it cracks, the relationship no longer feels safe. Nicole said she believes trust should feel steady, not something you have to check every day. She shared that when a partner keeps repeating certain mistakes, it becomes difficult to keep believing their promises. It is unclear if she meant emotional absence, poor communication, or unpredictable behavior, but many people interpret it as her subtle way of describing her struggles with Keith. She also became more open about valuing people who show up consistently, not only during good days, but also when life becomes heavy. She said real partnership means choosing each other again and again, even when things are hard. This statement made a strong impact online, with many fans saying it sounded like she had spent years feeling like she was carrying more emotional weight than she should have. Nicole ended one interview by saying she now chooses peace first and everything else second. This final line became widely shared because it reflected her growth, strength, and independence after the divorce. Even without naming Keith, she made it clear that she had stepped out of a situation that no longer supported her well-being, and she finally felt strong enough to speak her truth, calmly, wisely, and confidently as Nicole Kidman continued to open up in different interviews and public conversations. People started to understand that her journey after the divorce was not just about leaving a marriage. It was about rediscovering herself. She said that during certain phases of her past relationships, including the one with Keith Urban, she felt like she was slowly losing pieces of herself without even noticing it. She explained that when you love someone deeply, you sometimes make sacrifices that you believe are temporary. But over time, those sacrifices become your new normal. Nicole admitted that she had often put her own dreams, her own emotional needs, and even her own peace of mind aside to keep the relationship steady. She said this kind of emotional compromise can seem small at first, but when you add them up over years, they begin to shape who you become. She described it as slowly adjusting yourself to fit someone else's life, until one day you look in a mirror and realize you no longer recognize the person staring back. She shared that after the divorce, she finally had the space to breathe and think clearly. For the first time in a long time, she said she felt like she could hear her own voice without background noise. Nicole emphasized that silence is a powerful thing, because it shows you what your mind has been trying to tell you all along. During the marriage, she said she often pushed aside her own thoughts to keep harmony, but after the separation, she began listening to her inner voice again. That voice told her she had been carrying more responsibility than she should have, and that she deserved a relationship where she didn't have to constantly manage emotions, protect fragile moments, or walk carefully to avoid conflict. She said she realized that love should give you strength, not take your strength away. Nicole also spoke about how healing is not a straight line. She said some days she felt strong, confident, and free, while other days she felt confused by memories and moments she had tried to forget. She explained that when you leave a long relationship, you don't just walk away from a person. You walk away from routines, habits, dreams, and a version of yourself that existed only in that relationship. She admitted that she still had days where she questioned her choices or wondered if things could have turned out differently. But she said self-doubt is part healing, and it actually helps you grow. Nicole believes that every painful experience pushes you closer to understanding your true worth, and she finally stopped ignoring the signs her heart had been trying to show her for years. Another powerful point she made was about emotional maturity. Nicole said that as people grow older, they learn to value peace, stability, and emotional clarity more than passion without direction. She said she no longer romanticizes chaos or believes that love must always be dramatic to be real. Instead, she now looks for relationships where communication is honest, steady,